When you run a business, entering into contracts, negotiating contracts, or in any way thinking about entering into a contract is non-negotiable. It's the life force of your business. It's part of your day-to-day operations. But I find that most businesses make the mistake of either entering into poorly written contracts or entering into contracts that are not legally enforceable. But how can you avoid those mistakes? How can you pinpoint what a strong, legally enforceable contract looks like? As a founder, it's understandable that you'll be more focused on fundraising, gaining market traction, building your audience, and piquing investor interest. But in all of your getting, do not ignore legal aspects of your business, specifically contracts. As a founder, there are certain contracts that your startup needs to have. It's absolutely non negotiable. Your startup needs to have it for it to grow and grow sustainably. And what are these fundamental contracts? Number one is a founder's agreement. I don't care if you're two people, if you're 100 people, although I don't advise you to be 100 people, but I don't care how many you are. As a startup, you need to have a founder's agreement. As a startup, you need to have a founder's agreement. What does a founder's agreement do? It itemizes and lists out the scope of your relationship with your founders. Who is contributing what? Because most time, not all founders contribute equity, that's money. Some of them contribute their network. Some contribute their actual hard work to make sure that the company gets from point A to point B. Some contribute their experience, their expertise. So it needs to be properly written down what each party is contributing and what they get for their contribution. You also need to itemize or outline what the exit strategy is. Are the founders allowed to exit at IPO, before IPO, upon external investment? When can the founders exit the company? Because most times, most people just want to get something off the ground and then move on to the next project because they find the thrill in the building, not necessarily in the sustaining. And it's totally okay. Everybody has what floats their boat, and it's fine. So your founders agreement needs to specify all of this so that it doesn't breed resentment and hate and stall the growth of the business later in the future. The second essential agreement you need is an NDA to protect your confidential business information. Because let's face it, as a startup, there are some informations that you have that give you a competitive edge in the market. And you need to, by all means, protect that information. And the only way you can do that is by keeping it confidential and by demanding that other parties keep it confidential too. And how can you do that? With an NDA. The third essential agreement that as you need as a startup is an IP assignment, ownership, or licensing agreement, whichever one works for your particular use case. Now, especially if you're working with external developers or freelancers or consultants in any way, shape, or form, but they might develop something new under or while working with you. And it's important that you guys clarify who owns what, so that issues of, oh, I added to this, I removed from this, I modified this in another way, so therefore I have rights to it, don't come up in the future when the product becomes a hit in the market. The fourth contract every startup needs to have is independent contractor agreement with each of these freelancers that you are working with. The same way, if you have employees, you need to have employment contracts with each of them. The fifth essential agreement that startups need to have is a service level agreement, because it stipulates the scope of services that you are either giving or you're receiving. It stipulates the payment terms, the term and the termination of that contract, and every other thing that you need to make sure that that contract is legally enforceable, as I mentioned in my previous video. The sixth contract that every founder needs is vendor and supplier agreements. If you're, this is something to do with products and you require vendors or suppliers, don't forget to put all of your engagements with them in writing. You also need partnership agreements if you have a partner or you're entering a partnership with someone or a company. You also need digital policies, very, very important. And this requires a separate video on its own, which I will do. But you need digital policies. And what are digital policies? Your privacy policies, your terms and conditions or terms of use, your ULAs, right? Your cookie policies, etc. These digital policies are crucial for your business, especially if you have any digital product, SaaS, PaaS, infrastructure as a service, whatever the case may be. Even if it's open source, you need, to a certain extent, you need digital policies because they allow you comply with data privacy and protection laws across board, whether nationally or internationally. And it builds consumer trust with your users as well. So you need digital policies. You also need shareholder and investor agreements. So say for instance you have shareholders and or investors that are not necessarily the same person or the same thing or in the same category. Either ways, you need a shareholder or an investor agreement to outline what powers each person has in the company. What voting rights do they have? What level of control do they have? Do they have a seat on your board? What do they have? Can you buy back your shares? Very important. Can you buy back your shares? You need to itemize all these things in your shareholder or investor agreement so that stories that touch the heart will not happen. Another fundamental contract that every startup needs is an ESOP, which is employee stock option plan. So if you have restricted shares that you're giving to employees, either to incentivize top talent or to, give as a reward to existing talent, you need an ESOP agreement so that your staff or your employees know when that stock option will vest, how much it costs to buy, whether or not you as a company can buy back those shares, and so many other important details that get lost in translation. You need to write them down so that each party is clear on what is expected of them. Another fundamental contract that every startup needs is compliance contracts. So from data protection to cybersecurity, anti-money laundering, and all of that, you need agreements, contracts that signify that you are in compliance with the laws. So, depending on your specific industry, that will also determine which specific contract or compliance contract you have. Now, last but not the least is an investment or several investment contracts. So, from your term sheets to your equity investment contracts to saves, convertible notes, on and on it goes. You need investment contracts that stipulate the terms of the investor's investment in your company. Very important, very, 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 very crucial. So, like I said, these are the fundamental contracts that every startup needs. The rest are sector or industry or company specific.